Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series. I'm Dorian Mintzer. I'm your host and owner of Revolutionize Retirement. So let me introduce you now to my special guest, Mitch Anthony, who's a speaker and an author. And as all of you know who've signed up, the focus today will be on his book, The New Retirementality, Planning Your Life and Living Your Dreams at Any Age You Want. Let me tell you a little about Mitch. And first, I met him personally a few years ago now at the Encore Summit that was in Tempe, Arizona. And I remember really enjoying meeting him. And I have read his book and strongly recommend it to all of you. It's really an excellent book, and it's now the fourth edition of it. So I think you will find it very, very stimulating, and I think you're going to find the interview today very stimulating too. So let me tell you about Mitch. He's been challenging and inspiring people around the world for close to 20 years with his unique insights into the pitfalls of traditional retirement. He's the founder and president of Advisor Insights and the Financial Life Planning Institute, the leading provider of financial life planning tools and programs for the financial services industry. For almost 2 decades, Mitch and his team have provided training and development for both individual advisors and major organizations throughout the world. He personally consults with many of the largest and most recognizable names in the financial services industry on both financial life planning and relationship development. Mitch is a consistently top-rated presenter who's spoken to groups ranging from 10 people to more than 10,000, and he's been named one of the financial services industry's top movers and shakers for his pioneering work. He's a sought-after expert for the media and a regular columnist for Financial Advisor magazine, and the host of the daily radio feature, The Daily Dose, heard on over 100 radio stations nationwide. He's also the author of many groundbreaking books for advisors and consumers, including his perennial bestseller, Storytelling for Financial Advisors, which has been cited by Financial Advisor magazine as the #1 must-read book for financial professionals. His other books include The New Retirementality, which, as I said, is in its 4th edition, Defining Conversations, From the Boiler Room to the Living Room, The Financial Professional Storybook, Your Clients for Life, Your Client's Story, Selling with Emotional Intelligence, and the Financial Lit Kit, which I'm assuming is the Financial Literacy Kit. So I want to welcome you, Mitch, and I'm just delighted, and we're all delighted to have you with us today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you. And I wondered if we could just start with first of all, what got you interested in this whole field, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I'm an accidental tourist in financial services. I'm one of those people that gravitates toward problems, and I've always sort of lived by the mantra, find a need and meet that need. And for years I started in suicide prevention, believe it or not. And during the farm crisis, I've always been interested in the existential crises and crisis points that people reach in life. And that happened I was in Iowa. I grew up in Iowa during the farm crisis of the mid-'80s. It was kind of like the housing crisis we went through 9 years ago, but it was farms. Mm-hmm. And farmers were losing, farms that had been in the family for generations. And at the root of it all was a poorly informed financial decision. And that's when my eyes sort of got open to the linkage between making good decisions with money and having a good life. And so then, years later, I got pulled into the financial services arena, and I found lots of problems. And retirement was just one of them. As I often tell the audiences in that industry, you've built your entire industry on a really bad idea. Right?
Right.
18, 19 years telling them all you're doing is telling people to save for retirement. They get there and don't know what to do. And there's more to this conversation. You know, it's interesting to me because I'm just trying to get people to broaden the conversation. I don't know if you saw the article in the USA Today last week, but they actually did a story with me on retirement coaching, which is something I know you're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And
oh, no, I didn't see it. I'll have to look it up. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was last Tuesdays in the Money section by Bob Powell, excuse me. But I've been just trying to get that industry, and the reason I'm working on the issue in that industry is because when you think of retirement planning, what do you think of? You think of sitting down with maybe a CFP, a financial planner, financial advisor. Those are the people having the conversation for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But they're having such a restricted conversation around numbers that really, you know, so what if you have the money? I mean, hey, it's great to have the money, but it's like I always tell my audiences, money will fund a purpose, but it won't find a purpose. And if you don't have a predisposed purpose to wake up to every day, what good does the money do you? And so sort of a bookend phrase I often throw out to my consumer audiences is you need enough purpose to wake up in the morning, enough money to sleep at night. That's the relationship between the two.
Oh, that's quite important. Yeah. And I think that's part of the groundbreaking work that you've done over these last 20 years of really helping this holistic financial planning arena develop more, which is wonderful.
Well, yeah, money in and of itself has no meaning.
Right.
Right.
People can be very wealthy and, as you say, be isolated and, not have any sense of well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. I for example, I was called into Pinehurst, which is sort of a well-known retirement destination. A hospital foundation brought me in 3 times in the last year and a half. And at first I thought, well, this is odd. These people are all already retired, and a lot of them are very wealthy people, and don't really have financial concerns. But to your point, they were all concerned about well-being. And it was amazing as I was talking, they were coming up in their 70s and their 80s and even 90s saying, that's right on, Mitch. That's absolutely the way it is. And just to go back a little bit, Dory, I can remember even as a kid looking at this thing called retirement and asking myself, what in the world is that? Like why would you take a job you hate and do it for 40 years that you can someday retire to 40% less income and drive an RV down the road? I couldn't quite wrap my mind around it. And the more I studied the topic and investigated its origins and investigated the true impact of the concept on a lot of people, the more it just affirmed to me that for the vast majority, I'm not saying for everyone, but for the vast majority, traditional retirement is a really bad idea. The idea of the cessation of all meaningful work engagement is a really bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you can share a little, and I mentioned this actually right before we started, but I love your total book, but what I also really, really found and find, helpful with it is you get into some of the sort of the whys and how the traditional concept of retirement developed, which I think is so interesting for people to understand. So maybe you can talk a little about that now to kind of give us the frame.
That's a great point. Yeah. That's a great point. And, one of the points I like to make, Dory, is that, if this was a natural sort of phase of life, if you will, then we would see incidences of institutionalized retirement in the earliest writings of mankind, wouldn't we? But we don't. Mm-hmm. So we have to fast forward in the history of mankind all the way to the year 1885, and we find ourselves in industrialized Germany under the tutelage of Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. And what he was seeking to do is sort of remove people that weren't productive from the government, what he felt were unproductive because of their age. And he set the marker at 70. And it's kind of interesting why he chose that age. He actually found it in the Bible that God had promised a man 70. Okay, so for those keeping score, that's 70. And it actually started out sort of like a disability insurance program, really. It was if you were sort of invalidated, couldn't work, you could retire to this sort of pension. And one of the ironies of von Bismarck's legislation was that von Bismarck himself was 76 at the time. So apparently didn't apply to him. He was grandfathered in, right? And then if you if you fast forward 50 years to the United States, 1935, we find that we're in the throes of a real unemployment crisis in this country, in the Great Depression. And FDR's advisors came to him and said, one of the things you ought to do along with your works program is to create some sort of government pension or incentive to leave the workplace, and that way some of these younger people that are clamoring for work could get it when the older workers leave. A lot of people don't realize, but in 1935, if you were 65 years old, and of course you and I know that 65 in 1935 was a lot older than 65 today, but in 1935, if you were 65 years old, there was a 90-95% chance you were still working. And so this thing that we now know as Social Security, the Social Security Act, was born. What a lot of people don't know about the Social Security Act, the original name of it was the Older Workers Pension Act of 1935. Now that really didn't resonate with the public, right? Let's retire and collect from the old fogey fund. That just didn't appeal. Mm-hmm. And they changed the name of it, and they set the marker at 65, just like Germany had done originally, and there were a number of state pensions that had set the age at 65. And then in 1937, they realized, and this is just sort of a statistical oversight, that the average American lived to be 62. And so collecting their first check at they lived to be 63. And so collecting their first check at 65 wasn't all that alluring. And so they lowered the age of eligibility to 62 in 1937, which is where it stands today, which is crazy, isn't it, when you think about it?
Well, 62 is so young, and now with people living longer, I mean, when you think about all the years that we have ahead of us, the idea of, that traditional concept, as you said before, of retiring sort of from life, doesn't cut it anymore.
Well, and one of the things, I sort of like, in looking back, like to ask questions like, what was this thing really designed to be? Mm-hmm. And then does it really still fit? And it really, what retirement was, the invention of retirement, was a social construct intended and designed for the age it was invented in. It was designed around the industrial model. So in the industrial age, you collected a paycheck on the basis of physical output, didn't you? I mean, that's where the term labor came from, right? And, another interesting thing when you're talking about the construct of retirement to note is the language, the lexicon of language around work in the industrial age and before the industrial age. The words like job and occupation didn't exist until the industrial age. The words that people used were avocation and calling and apprenticeship, etc. And when I compare those two lexicons, it seems to me that the soul of work was stripped away in the industrial age because you became parts of a machine, so to speak, replaceable cogs in machinery. And so to the industrialist, it just made sense that a person at the age of 65 was slowing down, waning in efficiency or motivation or strength, and that we could pull that person out and replace them with a 20-year-old. And the machine would resume its efficiencies. So I guess I can give my nod to the industrialist and say, I suppose, given that model, that I can see why your mind went that way. But then it sort of became the norm and the status quo. And so you and I and a lot of people on this phone call didn't make our living or don't make our living in an industrial age reality. It's what are we trading for a paycheck for those of us that are working? We're trading what we know. We're trading who we know, and we're trading our experience. All of which, by the way, what we know, that's intellectual capacity, who we know, relational capacity, and experiential capacity, all of those actually appreciate with age rather than deteriorate. So that's what, point. So it made sense when it was all about physical capacity, but it makes zero sense when it's about intellectual, relational, and experiential capacity.
So how would you change it? And maybe that ties into this new retirementality that maybe you can expand on for us now.
Well, not to be cute about it, but I kind of promote this idea of your IRA, and that's what I mean by your IRA is your independent retirement attitude. What I'm trying to say to people is don't let them tell you what to do with your life. This is a life decision, as you and I know. And there's just a cultural expectation, a social expectation around age. At the end of the day, if I had to draw one conclusion about retirement, the conclusion I would draw is this: it is a social expectation and a social policy that is ageist at its core. Mm. And it's premised on the idea that we can predict what people's value is in the workplace by their age. Now, anyone who says amen to that is an ageist, because all 65-year-olds are not equal, just as all 55-year-olds are not equal and all 75-year-olds are not equal. And so we cannot predict a person's value or contribution on the basis of their age, but that's exactly what retirement policy does. So what I'm trying to say to people is don't let them tell you what you can or cannot do on the basis of your age. It's your decision. Now, a lot of people work for institutions and organizations and industries where they're sort of pushed out. I'll give you a perfect example of it. I live right next to the Mayo Clinic, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard of in Rochester, Minnesota. I talk to doctors all the time who tell me, Mitch, I'm at the top of my game. I'm a surgeon. I'm talking about people that are ranked 1, 2, and 3 in the world for their specialty. And they've made every mistake you can make as a surgeon. They've learned some things. Well, I don't want to be the surgeon's guinea pig, do you? Right? And these people are at the top of their game, and right when they're at the top of their game, the institution says, now it's time to go. What is the sense in that? As long as a person is able and competent and willing, why do we then push them out?
Do you think that's part of why there's no longer, in most professions now, or most industries, except maybe pilots and maybe there's some others, where there isn't the mandatory retirement age, that it's shifting a little from it, even though I do 100% agree that there's, an extreme ageist perspective about people and their age. Yeah,
well, it's beginning to move. It's not moving fast enough, but you mentioned the pilot. I think the pilot thing moved from 60 to 65. Is that? I'm not sure if that's correct.
I think so. Yeah.
Right. So think about it. With our culture had this the flight industry all of a sudden had a revelation that you could be competent between the ages of 60 and 65. How about that?
Right.
I like to put it this way. When I'm talking to audiences of, a lot of times I speak just to consumer audiences about the issue and say, how many of you know somebody who's 75 and acts like they're 50? And everybody raises their hand. Mm. They say, how many of you know somebody who's 45 and acts like they're 90? And everybody raises their hand. And I say, now what you're acknowledging here by assenting to these two questions is that you understand the difference between, age and old. Mm-hmm. Age is a chronological marker, but old is an attitudinal marker. And one does not become old until one decides to become old. And we all know people who prematurely decided to become old.
Right. That's where that internalized ageism is, that it's all over the hill.
Yeah. And one of the most remarkable research findings I've ever seen is about our attitude toward aging. I apologize, I can't remember the citation on this. It was a school out east, but they said that their finding was that you could add 7.5 good years to your life simply by changing your attitude toward aging.
That was Becca Levy out of Yale.
Thank you. Thank you. Isn't that the most remarkable thing, though? Right? And
it really is. And
how deeply embedded in our culture is it for people to be apologizing for their age, or they don't want to tell you their birthday, and it drives me nuts. And I love the take of Viktor Frankl on all this. I've always been a big Viktor Frankl fan and read just about everything he ever wrote. And he said, why would I apologize for what I've lived through, for where I've been, for the loves I've loved, the sorrows I've suffered through, for the experience I have? It's all mine. You can't take any of it from me. Why would I apologize for that?
That's very profound, and it's true. It's the wisdom and perspective that we get, even from all the bad things, and that happen in life. It's the human spirit, really, that you're talking about, and that there's no age to the human spirit.
Yeah, and that's what the new Retirementality is all about, is that, the outward man may be decaying, but the inward man and woman is being renewed day by day. And that's what we need to talk about. I had this sort of little epiphany flying home I did a speaking tour in South Korea a couple of years ago, and I'm flying home, and I just had this strange thought, we live in one of the few cultures in the history of mankind, Dory, that does not venerate age and maturity and experience. In the history of mankind. Mm-hmm. What we venerate in our culture is youth. And the last time I checked on youth, they had a lot to learn. Mm-hmm. I could say it in harsher terms, but I'll just leave it at that.
No, it's true. And I think the problem often is that when people are apologetic about their age or feel, I'm over the hill, there isn't that embracing what you have to give and share and the wisdom and perspective. But there's also a lot to learn from people younger as well as older. I mean, it's like valuing the stories it's part of that human spirit again, valuing the stories that we all have so that we can learn from each other. But you're absolutely right that, if in fact the feeling is once you're a certain chronological age, you can't do things, then if you believe it, you're not going to be able to do things. And it's sad. I don't know who this comment is from, but so please, when you have comments or questions, please say who you are and where you're from, because competition now for the best question all to get a copy of Mitch's book. But it's just about the idea of somebody living longer, and it's not totally tied into what you're just saying, but I think it's important to integrate it. She said, I just read a recent article about a woman either 102 or 105 who had taken out a reverse mortgage to pay for her assisted living care, had outlived her money. She was having to move from the center in which she had lived for 20 or so years because she no longer had the funds to pay for it, since she had run through all the money she had gotten from her reverse mortgage. I mean, it's a little off topic, but related to the fact that we're living so much longer. I wonder if you had any comments about that?
Well, we're back to the relationship to money, right?
With the money, right, yeah.
If we don't anticipate that we may live to that sort of age, then we are going to have issues.
Right.
And to me, it's all the more reason to elongate the paid working life, as long as you're willing, able, and competent to do so, to work longer. Mm-hmm. Because I'll tell you this, psychologically, I'm not an expert on the algebra side of the financial planning, but I'll tell you this from a psychological point of view. One of the scariest days in a person's life is the last day of the cash paycheck. Mm-hmm. Because it's on that day that the price of everything begins to matter. We're now dealing with an economic life, where we have a static income but inflationary cost. That pressure just builds over time. Mm-hmm. So the ability to keep our spending in line, and the ability to keep income coming in as long as is possible, it's all the more germane when you're retiring at 65 and living to 105, isn't it?
Mm. Right, good point. Well, maybe this is an opportunity to expand, because I totally agree that it's more than money. I know that part of what you talk about is kind of the E.P.I.C retirement. Perhaps you can elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, it's just an acronym for 4 aspects of life that you can have if you take the right attitude into this. And I'm really more about attitude than anything, because the attitude is so important, not just toward age, but toward life itself. And so the E in E.P.I.C is engagement. And I think in many ways, and when I say engagement, I mean engaged in something productive, whether you're being paid or not. A lot of your listeners, I'm sure, are involved as engaged as volunteers. And it's a very important part of life to be engaged. I think one of the things the industrial age succeeded in doing was giving work it became treated as a 4-letter word, right? Mm-hmm. That it was like this yucky thing, and I want to get rid of work, and I don't want to work anymore. Well, work is a good thing when it's coming from your heart. You know, I like to describe it this way. I have a couple descriptions I like to bring to the work engagement here. One, it's the most fulfilling type of work is when my hands, my head, and my heart come together in a task. The other definition I give of work is that it is an engagement that brings value to others and meaning to me. Paid or unpaid, it's an engagement that brings value to others and meaning to me. So work's gotten a bad name in all this, and I think we're coming to realize, and I know this for a fact because 60% of the people that retired this year are going to be back to work part-time in 9 months, and most of them will tell you it's because they feel healthier when they're doing something part-time, or they feel engaged, or they feel connected, or they feel like they matter. People have a need to bring value, and people have a need to feel meaning in whatever it is they do. And so that's the first part of the epic retirement, is realize that having some serious engagement in your life is really, really important. The P in epic is purpose. And whatever that, everyone's purpose is idiosyncratic. We all feel purpose from different things in life. And so it's just, we have to think through that. What gives me purpose? What makes me feel like I matter when I wake up, that my life matters? We got to get a focus on that. The I in epic is integration. It's finding the balance between vacation and vocation. I think we've been sold a bill of goods in this country, and the financial services industry is largely responsible for it because they figured out it was a good way to get people to save money and invest money. But we've been sold on this leisure life retirement that the research is now in and shows that a life filled with nothing but leisure does not actually satisfy. And in fact, what it does is it bores people and turns them into bores. Right. And I had a gerontological researcher at the Mayo Clinic put it to me this way. He said, Mitch, I can demonstrate to you that a life of total ease is 2 steps removed from a life of total disease. Mm-hmm. And he said the first step in the progression is boredom, and the second step is pessimism. And he said from there it's just a downward spiral, physically and psychologically. So we've been sold this bill of goods about leisure life retirement that doesn't really work. And so what I'm advocating for the epic retirement life is find your balance between vacation and vocation, but never lose sight of the fact that it is about balance. And then the C in epic is for challenge, that we've got to maintain challenge in our life. Now, I'm sure you've seen the studies out of the Dementia and Alzheimer's Institute about maintaining intellectual challenge in your life. Mm-hmm. And this is more than doing Ken and crossword, right? This is having an opportunity, being able to solve real life problems. And another study I just saw recently showed how people age so much better when they have some generative activity in their life. They're creating something. They're doing something. So it could be art, it could be anything, but it's being productive with our lives. And another way I sort of can contrast these two ideas is I think what we've been sold is a consumer retirement, but what satisfies is a contributing retirement. Right?
Can you say more about that? Say more about that if you would. And again, I want to encourage people to submit questions and comments just on the event page on the left-hand side. Just say who you are, where you're from, and send me your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so what people have been sold is the consuming retirement, and that is, buy this lot behind this gated village and play all day and consume good food and drink, and then get up tomorrow and do the same thing. But it doesn't satisfy. It actually ends up boring people. Now there's those exceptions who are like, that's all I ever need to do the rest of my life, and that's great, right? But people are most happy when they're contributing, right? When they're bringing something forward to others around them, not just consuming for themselves. I mean, consuming lifestyle leads to selfish lifestyle. And so, we're learning some things about all this. And the challenge thing, I don't want to get off that right away, because it's not just about being intellectually challenged, but it's about being physically challenged, spiritually challenged. There are plenty of studies on maintaining physical challenge in your life and working at doing things you're not sure you could do. I have a great example. Is my dad in his 80s, who I started telling about a guy I met at the gym who's 80 years old, and he shoots 200 baskets every day. And I asked him, I said, Naj, how is it that you're the only guy your age out here shooting baskets? He said, because everyone else found the excuse they were looking for. He said, of course my wrist hurts. Of course my shoulder hurts. Of course my ankle hurts. But you got to fight through it. And if you don't fight through it, they atrophy and it gets worse. And so I told that to my dad, and he started telling me, well, I can't because my wrist hurts and, blah, blah. Well, guess what? He started trying it, and now my dad goes out and shoots baskets 4 days a week, 150 shots each time.
That's great.
And he said what it's done for his spirit and his attitude and his energy, he said, is just off the charts.
Yeah.
It's invigorated him. He's out there shooting baskets with junior high age kids and high school kids and college kids, and they love it.
So that gives them the physical challenge, but also the intergenerational, the kind of being around younger people, which is
absolutely.
Really
when you say that, it reminds me of an artist I heard in Canada. She was 92 at the time, and they were talking to her about, how do you stay so young and so vibrant? And she talked about drinking rye at night. I don't know if any of your listeners are interested in that. One of the things she talked about being an artist. She talked about how an artist never sees the same seashore twice. They always see the nuances and the changes. It keeps your observational skills sharpened. But the other thing she talked about, she said twice every week she had lunch with women who were at least 40 to 50 years younger than her.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've heard this from others who said, you know what, I don't want to just be a historian.
Right. Well, it's one of the benefits, I must say, from my own life, which, sort of has its own circuitous path, where I became a mom at 50 when most of my friends were becoming grandparents, and it keeps me young. My son is now turning 20.
Wow.
And my husband's in his early 80s and exercises 3 times a week, still works a few days a week. And, you don't have to have a kid to stay vital and connected to other people, but it certainly keeps you young.
Yeah, right. You don't have a choice, right?
Right. But say more. Clearly, the engagement, the purpose, the integration, the challenge are all part of the retirementality that you're talking about, this kind of new attitude and mentality about retirement. Say more about some of what, you see in that and that you've learned that will be helpful for the listeners to think about. And I think it ties into the balance part that you talked about.
Well, to me, the attitude, one of the fundamental attitudes here is, let's just take age out of the discussion. Because retirement is retirement is 62, 65, whatever number you want to throw out there, is nothing more than an artificial finish line. It was imposed by society. And so let's just take age out of it and ask ourselves, how do I live a good, healthy life? And how do I think the focus today is on aging well. And so there's been so many good studies on how we age well. I have a chapter in my book called The Vitamin C's of Successful Aging. It just so happens that a lot of the findings around aging well start with the letter C, starting with connectivity, staying connected to people that are energized by you and that you are energized by. Right? Now, that just seems like common sense, doesn't it, Dory? To stay connected. So what do we do in America? People retire, and they move 1,500 miles away where they don't know a soul, and they even hate their accent. Now, who dreamed this up? I'll tell you who dreamed it up. Del Webb dreamed it up. And what a lot of people don't realize is that Del Webb actually invented this whole concept of the leisure life retirement. He actually invented the words golden age and golden ager. It was a way of selling real estate. It was a marketing scheme.
Yep. And people
right?
have really bought into it. Yeah.
And our world bought into it, and it was sold everywhere by everyone. And so, I mentioned Pinehurst here recently. One of the guys I talked to there, he's been there 10 years, and he says in the 10 years he's been there, 70% of his neighbors have moved back home because they were missing that connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important to have the connections in your life that matter most to you, not to move away from those connections. So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is curiosity. When we get to the point where we're no longer curious and no longer teachable and no longer want to learn, desire to learn anything, well, we've already begun dying then. Mm. And that's not age linked either. There are people at 30 that have that kind of attitude. And so it's really important to wake up with that fascination about life, the world, what's going on, and to maintain curiosity in our lives and to fuel that curiosity and to be around people who are curious. And creativity, charity, there are just so many things. I'm not going to go through it word for word here, but in the vitamin C's of successful aging, we break these factors down because I think that's what people are interested in at any age, and that is aging well.
Oh, absolutely. And, from positive psychology, we know that well-being is connection, engagement, meaningful relationships, purpose and meaning, all the things that you're talking about. It's just crucial for it's aging well and living well, both. I have a couple of comments, questions now from people that let me just integrate and then we can keep going. So Sarah from Atlanta says the irony of the consumer lifestyle is that everyone eventually must downsize and rid themselves of the things they have consumed. And Nancy from Charlotte says, my observations are that husbands are unable to find that balance that you were talking about and can't seem to find something that might interest them. Thoughts, advice?
Oh, boy. And boy, is she, who wrote that?
Yeah. Nancy from Charlotte?
Nancy from Charlotte is right on the money.
Yeah.
A lot of times people think I'm being sexist, and I don't mean this toward women, but toward men when I'm talking to consumer audiences, because I talk about the men and the trouble they have. Women seem to have the capacity for adjusting and finding balance better than men. I don't know why. But I can tell you a number of reasons I've discovered. One is the identity issue, right? That the identity circumnavigating what I do for a living totally, nothing but, right? I hear so many stories, some of which are tragic. I mean, I got a phone call 6 months ago from a financial planner in California who told me about a doctor that he'd helped to retire. Worked with him for over 30 years, and 6 months into his retirement, this doctor took his own life. And his suicide note said, 6 months ago, I was Dr. So-and-so. Today, I'm no one. Mm-hmm. And so that
people feel that way, yeah.
Yeah, and that speaks to the identity issue. I've heard so many funny things from women on this. I mean, it's kind of like the classic yarn you've heard, I married you for better, for worse, but not for lunch. Get out. I had a woman come up to me in Texas after a talk, and she said, son, I'm going to give you the math on retirement. She said, I got twice the husband, half the space, and he's getting bigger. And then another woman said to me, I've got twice the husband and half the income. This is not the deal I was looking for. And what I tell a lot of financial planners who are talking to men who think they're ready to retire is to have them sit down and watch the movie About Schmidt. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a poignant portrait of the existential crisis that a lot of men are going to go through. Mm-hmm. And I especially feel bad and worry about men who don't have hobbies and don't have friends, networks outside of work.
Right.
Those are the ones that are in trouble. And they start resembling another Jack Nicholson character, the one in The Shining.
Oh, my. Now, that is the extreme, but that could be the spiraling down. That's true. They're slowly losing it. And
so, and a lot of people they have this sort of pipe dream that, well, I'm going to golf. Well, first thing I ask them is, you think you're going to get that much better? Are you really going to enjoy your golf? Because you're going to beat yourself up. I know a lot of guys go golf and then they beat themselves up over how bad they played every day. Well, what's the point of that? Right? And so,
well, I have a challenge. Oh, no, finish up, and then I have a challenging question here for you.
Oh, okay. Well, no, but it's that your questioner or your commenter from Charlotte has a good point, and that is that this is just a little harder thing to figure out for men.
Yeah. No, I totally. I hear that from men. I hear men being terrified, and it becomes so important, I think, for men before they retire, if they are going to retire, to think about what other parts of themselves they want to develop, so they have other either hobbies or other aspects of their identity that they can, feel good about. I do think that's important. But I do have an interesting comment, really, from Dale, who's from Ohio. And he says, I'm Dale from Ohio. I worked 40 years in industry and raised a family. I've been retired for 2 years. I'm 65 years old, and I do nothing but have fun. Life of leisure except for a few chores. I'm still trying to convince myself that I have not died and gone to heaven. I guess some people were for retirement. How many are in my boat? The life of leisure is very satisfying. I should say is very satisfying. He has that in capitals. I exercise, golf, shoot, reload, read, watch movies, and socialize. I think Americans are too hung up on achieving and productivity. Godliness with contentment is great gain. Americans learn to be content. So it's another viewpoint. So I just wonder how you might.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I'm happy for him. I'm happy for him, and godliness with contentment is great gain, and it is more than just work and productivity that makes a person happy. A lot of times, and I don't know if it was Dale's case, a lot of times I see that sort of take in perspective from people that just got weary of the work they did. Right. And it feels like being paroled, right? Yeah. And it feels like being liberated and set free. I'm not saying that was the case with Dale, but I meet a lot of people who feel that way because they just the work wore them down, or they got tired of it, or it got redundant, or it got rote. But what about those people that actually love what they do? See, that's a different story. So that's why I'm saying, so Dale's got his take on it, and his take is working for him. And all I'm trying to say, I'm not advocating for everyone working or everyone continuing to be productive. What I'm advocating for is your own individual attitude carrying the day here. Right. So what works for you and what it works for Dale isn't going to work for Mitch. I can tell you that right now. I have to be doing something that makes me feel like I'm contributing to the world at large, or I'm not going to be happy, because we're all wired differently. Absolutely. And what I often find, too, in my coaching work is that many people really love, just like what you were saying, that retirement phase, in a sense, or the honeymoon phase, of retirement, where they really have been burnt out and love the life of leisure. I sometimes get people who, a few years out come in saying something's missing and wanting to build something. Well, that's it, Dorian. Not everybody. Not everybody, but see, I always tell this to people that I meet who have just retired. I say, what you're going to go into here is a decompression period. Mm-hmm. Right? All of a sudden, there's just no pressure on your life. Right. And it's relaxing. And you're going to discover things about yourself. But someday, you're going to wake up, most of you are going to wake up and go, okay, that was fun. Mm-hmm. Now what do we do? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? People talk about the bucket list. Well, what happens when you have nothing left on your bucket list? Mm-hmm. Create a new one, or you do something else that gives some purpose. Well, hopefully you don't kick the bucket, right? Right. True. Good point. But I think your point is well taken. It really is different for everybody. But what's important is to think about what for you is going to give you that sense of feeling alive and feeling vital, and there's no right way. There's no right way. I think that's what it comes down to. Yeah, understand yourself, understand the human condition, and understand that it's got to work for you. What worked for others may not work for you. Mm-hmm. And Dale is actually sort of the exception in this conversation. You know, there are, and I meet a lot of people like that who just like, you know what, I'm going to play my life away, and I couldn't be happier. And I'm like, I'm happy for you.
Right.
And I would too if that was the way I was wired.
Yep. Right. Well, so there are more questions are coming in, so let me sort of just keep with some of them now. So Cullen from Honolulu asks, how do you teach purpose? He says, I'd like to create a transition and retirement type class and would like to suggest that purpose is primary. And then he says, Maslow's hierarchy of needs suggests that physical needs are more important than self-actualization and possibly purpose. Do you think he has it wrong?
Well, I don't think, I would disagree with that take on Maslow. What Maslow was trying to teach was that you can't talk to people about actualization if the lower needs are not being met. Right? So if somebody doesn't know where they're going to get their next meal from, it's probably not a good conversation to talk to them about what's your dream for 10 years from now. Right? Their dream is to get some food in their stomach. So what Maslow was teaching is that basic survival needs have to be met before we can move to the next layer, which is safety needs. And before we can then move to the next layer, which is, you know, love and relational needs. Then we go to the next layer, which is self-esteem, then self-actualization. So there's a progression in meeting those needs is what my take on Maslow.
Yeah.
So, but how do you go about teaching purpose? I don't know. I guess I just start looking through the bibliography on the topic and see what kind of ideas are out there. Purpose and meaning, these words are sort of synonymous. The questions I like to ask people are, what are you doing when you feel most alive? Where are you? Who are you with? What are you doing? Those are, to me, signals toward purpose and meaning.
I think those are really important signals, and others of you may want to bring forth some other thoughts that you have too on the comment question page. But I think it's what makes you come alive, what makes your soul sing, your spirit soar.
And the who is a big part of that, because ultimately there's nothing more important than relationships. So who are you with, and what are you doing with them when you feel most alive? You know. And so, you know, it could be that 2 hours a week with a grandchild. It could be the center, literally the core of purpose.
Right. Oh, excellent point. So here from Joe from Sunrise says, senior adults, I'm 70, can find fulfillment in reaching out to younger adults nearing retirement to make them more aware about their later years and how they can prepare for that time intelligently. That should include proper health coverage, saving as much as they can, and paying off their credit cards and studying what they would love to do, work or play in their last years.
Wow. Thank you, Joe. This is something I've been advocating for years. I call Joe a retire mentor. And beautiful. I just appreciate that he's doing that. And I've been actually trying to formalize that. I've been trying to get financial services firms and financial planning firms to formalize that process, to say, you know, let's find all the Joes and the Marys who've learned some things and create a retire mentor council and sit down with our people who are just, you know, coming up on that age of retirement to advise them. So Joe's got a wonderful idea, and I couldn't agree more.
Great. And then Sarah, who had asked a question before, had said, or is making a comment here, I think the reason why women adjust more easily is that they are often responsible for caregiving for their parents and parents-in-law. We see the consequences of unsuccessful aging, but women who have worked and had no kids, like me, can also have difficulty transitioning into retirement.
Yeah, she would know.
Well, but I think that it's tied in really with what you've been saying too, that if work or the caregiving, whether it be for children or parents or in-laws or whatever, if that need and your self-esteem that comes from that and the work, if you haven't been able to develop other parts of yourself, other identities, other hobbies, then it can be hard too for women as well as men.
Yeah, that's correct. So, to me, I have a little trouble with the people say, get over it. You're not working. But so I'll just give you my own personal case. I'm a writer by trade, I guess, is what people say. Well, he's a writer and a speaker. But for me, it goes deeper than that. It's about observing what's happening in our culture. It's about finding real needs, and it's about creating solutions. So, so what do you do with that, right? Am I supposed to just get over that and go play golf every day? Mm-hmm. So that's why I say it's different for everybody.
Right. And Douglas from Athens says, well, he wonders, how is shooting baskets contributing or productive? My point is that you diminish the value and potential of leisure. It may indeed be engaging in psychologically important ways. It isn't equivalent to consuming indolent self-indulgence. Interest and engagement are at least as well served in leisure as in work, but I agree that contributing typically gives life more purpose and meaning.
Yeah, and I agree with what he's saying, that they've discovered this thing that where it's the corporeal spark, the cognitive corporeal spark, that by challenging yourself physically, it actually sparks your brain, which is an interesting thing, isn't it? And yeah, we can find, I'm not saying we can't find meaning in leisure. For example, I'm an avid golfer too, and I see a lot of relationships that get built on the golf course and a lot of good conversations that happen. I'm not diminishing that, but I'm not attempting to diminish that there's value in that. But what I'm saying is, if it begins to feel like it's empty and it's Groundhog Day, it's like I had a guy come up to me in Florida here a few months ago and say, I couldn't wait for this life. Now he said, I have to drag myself to the tee time. So something got unplugged there that he needs to take a look at. So as long as someone's doing those kind of things and they're still being invigorated by it, go for it. But pay attention to the signals when you're no longer being invigorated by it.
And I think your point's so well taken, too, that with the reality that, hopefully many of us are living longer and healthier, or even with chronic or terminal illnesses, what we want and need and what makes us alive at, say, age 65 may be very different from at age 70, 75, 80, 85, 90. And so there really needs to be that flexibility as we look at our life and our life portfolio, so that, as you say, we can tune into whatever those signals are. And it doesn't mean we're a failure if, in fact, what was working for a number of years doesn't work later.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Know where you're at today, right?
Right.
And know that your case isn't everybody else's case. And this is where a lot of couples, this is another area I deal with in my book. A lot of couples struggles because they go into retirement with two different sets of expectations. And struggle when the other doesn't understand what they're trying to extract from this period of life called retirement. So that's an important conversation as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one that I'm very, very involved in, too, with the book that I co-authored, The Couples Retirement Puzzle.
Right.
It's hard. I always say it's hard as an individual, but it's even harder if you're in a relationship, because there may be different wants, needs, energy, ages, sometimes value differences. I mean, it can be very complicated. So conversations are key.
Right.
Totally key. So Louise from Los Angeles says, I hear your recommendations and advice, but how do we find out what would be fulfilling for us? It isn't an instant epiphany. And for those of us who have been working full time, we haven't had much time to figure out how we'd like to spend our time now.
Yeah, that's a great question. Is it Louise, did you say?
Louise, yeah.
Yeah, so I sort of look at, work and engagement as there's sort of phases we go through, modalities in our lifetime. When we first start, it's sort of a discovery phase, isn't it? Like we try things to see what fits and what doesn't. And a lot, how many jobs did you have where you were like, nope, not for me, right? and we weren't energized by it. And then a lot of people enter into what I call a utilitarian phase where, you know what, we got a mortgage, we got bills to pay, we've got obligations, I really can't afford to move, I can't afford to change. Then some people go into sort of a renaissance phase with work and engagement where they're just like, you know what, I can't do this for 20 more years. I need to find something else. And then they sort of re-enter the discovery phase. And I find that a lot of retirees, and I think this might be what Louise is getting at, is that she hasn't had time to sort of discover those things yet. So it's sort of like back to when you're in your 20s and you were trying things to see what resonated with you. So you're just going to have to get out there and try some things and see what clicks and what doesn't.
Well, I think what you said before, Mitch, is important too, maybe to reiterate here of, you know, those questions of what are you doing when you feel most alive? Who are you with? What makes you feel most alive if you're doing it with that person? I mean, that can help in that self-discovery phase.
And also I think it's important to talk about, you know, this is a phase of life where we can do a lot of giving back. So I think another important conversation is what injustices do you see in the world that bother you? What needs do you think your skills could help address? What causes do you think have really figured some things out and it would be fun to, you know, complement them, work alongside them? But to find ways to engage in the community that capitalize on all your experience and knowledge and relationships, et cetera.
Absolutely. And that can tie into often a wish for giving back, kind of concerns about legacy and how we want to be remembered, too. So I have, there are a few more questions here. And Mitch has said he could stay a little bit longer, so I do want to honor that. I know some people do need to get off. Actually, this next question, who's Mitch from Boston, says, I'm very interested in the concept. Could you repeat Joe's statement and expand more about a retirement? Has anyone created a council and or what it would look like, and what is the best way to start the process?
It's a financial professional asking that question. I can't give you any names right now. I've got somebody I'm going to be interviewing here in the next week or two who says they've done that. This is just sort of a novel concept that I've been throwing out in the last year or two. If the person asking a question is a financial professional, I encourage them to just start looking around in their clientele for people who are like Joe, who've sort of figured out some of these things and can advise younger retirees. And, you know, one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about retirement is it takes most people, according to a RAND study, about 3 to 4 attempts to get it right, to figure it out. Right? And so that tells me that there's sort of the evolution of retirement in a person's life, and that, you know, they just knowing they don't have to have it all figured out at the outset, right? That you can, you know, you'll make a plan, you'll try it, and it may not work, and you review it and make some adjustments, and, you know, it takes people 3 to 4 attempts to get it where they want it. That takes a little pressure off, too.
Right. And that it's not a failure. Although some people joke and say, I failed retirement, or, you know. Yeah. But there are a lot of years ahead, and I think what I find so important, too, is to, you know, recognize we have successes and failures, or, you know, and if we keep growing and learning, then we'll keep accommodating to what we need and what we want to do and how we want to give, you know, as we keep getting older.
Well, you know, I have to say this, and this might upset some people, but the reason people are struggling with this thing called retirement is because it's an unnatural act.
Well, as you said, it's an artificial finish line that
yes, it's an unnatural act, and no wonder people are struggling with it. And don't tell me that I have to retire. I don't have to retire.
Right. But if people want to, then
go ahead.
Something else. But yeah,
go ahead.
Right.
Yeah, and just find a life that works.
Right.
But don't expect it to be easy. You know, there's going to be adjustments.
Well, I think that's so important to think about too. And I often say that people sometimes don't realize what work has provided in terms of the structure, in terms of time together and apart if you're in a relationship, self-esteem, camaraderie, the connection, the engagement, the purpose and meaning. And if you don't have that in your life, it's so important to figure out how to build that in some way or another.
Right. That was a mouthful you just said.
Yeah. It's part of my mantra.
Yeah. Well, I call everything you listed, I call the lifestyle benefits of work, and that's what they are.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and I talk to those people who are back, they're handing out smiley faces and carts at Walmart, you know, and a lot of people they make a cultural cliche out of it. Well, I guess I'm going to be pushing carts at Walmart. Well, you know what? A lot of those people were there because they needed the social connectivity.
No, it's absolutely true. I wanted to comment on the Mitch from Boston. Even if you're not a financial person, to check and see what's happening in that area for setting these councils. It would seem to me that, you know, wherever you work, there's an HR department, and that could be a way of trying to see if there's an opportunity for people closer to retirement age or thinking about it, you know, to talk with younger employees, you know, not about retirement per se, but, you know, how do you want to live this next part of your life? And the HR people might be good resources for that.
Absolutely.
I have a couple more questions here. Cullen from Honolulu says that he appreciates your points. Cullen's the person who asked about Maslow and about how to teach purpose. He says, I appreciate Mitch's points and understand that is to each his own. However, as you state, there are so many issues that our next generation is faced with, and so much that older adults in skills, experience, knowledge, and time, that it seems such a waste if we can't do a better job at tapping this resource. What can we do to encourage purpose, not just for self-enrichment?
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that in 2 minutes.
So maybe that's one has to think about, that purpose partly can be for self-enrichment, but purpose can have that larger perspective of, as you were saying before, of the giving back, the being connected, the mentoring, whatever. And Sarah from Atlanta says, I'm working part-time now and still struggling with finding a new direction after 6 months. She says many boomers want instant answers, but she really thinks this is something that can't be resolved overnight.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So this has just been wonderful. I so appreciate you being with us and talking about this. And I just wonder what other final thoughts, takeaways. Well, before I ask that, why don't you tell people about your website and where they can get your book, and then we'll do the final takeaway and stuff. But
my website's really for business, so they can just go on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever to get the book. It's the new Retirementality, Retire and Mentality, all is one word. My name again is Mitch Anthony. And, you know, if you know someone who's about to retire, this is a good thing to get for them before they retire, so that they can filter some of those thought processes and think about some of these issues. And appreciate everyone being here today. And Dory, appreciate you taking the time to ask all these good questions. And my last thought is it's your life, and retirement is a part of your life that you should be the designer of, not someone else.
I think that's good final words. But I think I would just elaborate and say that it's an exciting time. And that idea of being a designer of your life, I just want to underscore that it goes back to, I think, your epic about the, you know, kind of the challenge, the engagement, the purpose, the opportunity for integration, that it really is an exciting time to design how do you want to live the rest of your life. But any other final things?
No, I can't add to that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mitch. And I really, as I said at the beginning, I encourage people to get Mitch's book. I think you're going to be very, very pleased with what you learned from it and how it it both gives you that framework of, even in more depth, the history of the traditional concept of retirement, and then just really challenges you to think differently about this next stage of life. So, and kind of where work fits in, where leisure fits in, where purpose, meaning, values fit in. It's an excellent book. So thank you,
Doris.
Mitch.
Appreciate that.
And thank you all for being here, and hope to see you all next month. Take care.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.